You've got two choices, the porch or my bed. The blunt offer cut through the night, stopping Clara cold at the lit wooden doorway. Behind her, flames devoured the overturned carriage. The shadow of her fallen fiancé slumped like a devil, waiting to rise. In her hand, the scorched marriage paper pressed against her skin, an unseen chain binding her soul. Before her, Wyatt Callan's dark eyes held no threat, only a strange, unshaken certainty. Clara whispered, "The bed, but with your arms around me." Yet she could not tell if that embrace would be her salvation, or the first step into a far greater reckoning. Red dust clung thick to every strand of hair, every fold of Clara May Hollis's dress, mingling with sweat and the blood seeping from her torn feet. She did not look back, did not dare stop to guess what else was burning behind her. Each heartbeat thundered like a war drum in her chest, driving her staggering steps forward. A hot wind swept across the parched prairie, heavy with smoke, searing away the memories she longed to bury. Yet the sight of the overturned wagon, flames leaping from tar-soaked wheels, and the crumpled body of Ralston, the man who called himself her husband, seared her mind, so vivid it nearly stole her breath. Ralston had fallen, face pressed into the dust, hands curled useless and weak. For a fleeting moment, Clara thought fate had released her, but as her ragged breath scraped her dry throat, another terror surged. What if he was not truly dead? What if his men still lingered, waiting for her to falter and drag her back like traded goods? The thought drove her faster, though every step ripped her flesh raw, though her heel had snapped long ago, leaving her bare feet to stab against thorns and stone. The Texas sunset spilled like blood across the sky, drowning the horizon in crimson haze. Clara did not know how long she had run. Her throat was parched, her lungs scorched as though fire raged inside her chest. In her left hand, she gripped a crumpled sheet of paper, its edges blackened by flame, the forged marriage license Ralston had forced her to sign. Inked lies, yet heavy as chains, binding her life to his bargains. That paper was no less than a shackle, turning her into coin for his gambling debts. Clara had thought herself hardened to cruelty, but when he cornered her hand upon that page, she learned shame could kill a soul long before any knife or gun. The horror did not end there. Through the dry wail of wind, Clara swore she still heard Ralston's hiss in her ear. "You're mine. The signature says so." His body might lie beneath the fire, yet his voice clung like a ghost. She gripped the paper tighter, trembling with rage and fear. If someone found it, would they believe the word of a runaway woman, or the false seal stamped upon it? The path sloped down into a narrow ravine. Dust blurred her sight, but far ahead she glimpsed faint blue smoke, thin against the black pillar rising behind. Perhaps it was only a mirage, but her heart clung to it like a lifeline. Smoke meant fire, and fire meant people, and people meant a chance. Clara paused, breath shuddering. Her hand pressed the paper to her chest, heart pounding beneath the thin fabric. For an instant she wondered why she still kept it, why she had not cast it into the flames. Then the answer rose clear, because pain needed proof. One day this page might be the only truth to show she had not run away, but had been sold. The evening wind cooled as the sun kissed the horizon. Darkness crept in, mixing with dust that would not settle. Clara drew her coat tight and pressed onward, step after ragged step. In her head, one command beat like a drum: Don't look back. Don't stop. Behind her, fire still roared, devouring the wagon and the man who once sneered that her life was worth no more than a card game. But ahead, somewhere ahead, there was another light. Not fire, but the glow of life, the promise of a beginning. And so, through the red dust of twilight, a young woman kept running, fist clenched around a tattered scrap of paper, eyes fixed on a road that might yet lead her to freedom. As the last red of sunset faded behind the mountains, Clara stood still before a lone wooden cabin nestled in the valley. A ribbon of pale blue smoke rose from the chimney, thin as silk against the darkening sky. Her breath came ragged, sweat dampened her palms, yet she lifted her trembling hand and knocked 3 times on the door. The sound echoed in the silence, a hollow rhythm that matched her heartbeat. The door opened slowly. A tall man filled the frame, broad-shouldered, his earth-toned shirt rolled to the elbows, hands still marked with wood and dust. Lantern light spilled from within, casting across a sun-browned face and dark eyes that studied her with careful measure. Clara tried to speak, but her throat was dry, releasing only a broken gasp. "Are you lost?" His voice was low and rough, plain, neither warm nor cold. Clara steadied herself, tattered dress fluttering in the wind, bare feet throbbing as if nailed to the ground. She longed to explain, to justify, but all her words fell into a single plea. "Water. Please, some water." The man frowned lightly, though not with suspicion. He stepped onto the porch, keeping a few paces between them, as though weighing what trouble she might bring. Clara felt his gaze, yet there was no contempt in it, only the guarded watchfulness of a man too long alone. "You're hurt," he said, his eyes dropping to the blood on her feet. She shook her head quickly, feigning strength. "I'm fine. I'll leave when the sun comes." Silence hung heavy on the porch. The wind tore through the pines, carrying smoke and damp earth. His hand rested on the doorframe. Then his voice came, each word steady. "You won't sleep outside tonight. Here. You've got 2 choices. The porch." He paused, gaze steady on hers. "Or my bed. I'll take the floor." Clara froze at the blunt offer. Her throat tightened, but her heart hammered with the terror still clinging behind her. The burning wagon, Ralston's crumpled form swallowed by smoke, none of it yet faded, as though he might rise again at any moment. Fear shook her legs, made the wooden porch seem too thin to shield her. She lifted her eyes and met his dark gaze. No threat, only quiet resolve. In that instant, Clara knew what she truly needed was not just a roof or a warm bed, but an arm steady enough to remind her the nightmare had been left behind. Her voice broke free, fragile but true. "In the bed, but with your arm around me." It was not a bold demand, but a bare confession. She needed a hold to believe she was safe, to calm her racing heart, to know she would not face the night alone. Wyatt was silent a moment, considering. Then he nodded once, steady and sure. A simple nod, yet within it lay acceptance, a wordless vow from a seasoned man. He opened the door wider, lantern glow spilling across the porch, showing her the way inside. "Wyatt Callan," he said, his voice even. Clara clutched the crumpled paper in her hand, drawing a long breath to steady herself. Clara May Hollis. And with fear still lingering and hope just sparked, she crossed the threshold. Night closed in, the cabin bathed in the soft gold of a single oil lamp on a small table. Clara stood near the door, clutching the worn paper as if unsure she truly had found rest. Her breath still hitched, the memory of fire and dust swirling close. Wyatt added wood to the hearth, then turned, his voice slow, careful. "The bed's cold. I'll lie first to warm it, then, if you're willing, you can join." The words startled her, awkward but honest enough to ease her heart more than 100 promises. She nodded faintly, watching as he drew back the quilt and stretched out, his broad frame filling the bed, making it less foreign, less strange. Later, when only the crack of burning wood broke the quiet, Wyatt sat up, his tone low. "It's warm now. If you can bear it, rest here." Clara swallowed hard, legs trembling as she stepped closer. She perched on the edge, a strange mix of shyness and relief washing over her. Wyatt shifted aside, making space, then asked softly in the dim, "Do you feel at ease?" She turned, meeting his gaze glimmering in firelight. No hidden edge, only patient waiting. She nodded, whispering, "Yes, thank you." Silence lingered, awkward, but gentle. After a pause, Clara inched closer, laying her head against his chest like a child seeking shelter. Warmth spread from his solid frame, easing the tightness in her body. For the first time in many desperate days, Clara let go, eyelids falling, sleep claiming her swift and strangely peaceful. Wyatt lay still, eyes open, staring at the timbered ceiling. His arm tightened unconsciously around the woman pressed to him. Yet his own heart pounded, too restless for sleep. Her scent, her steady breath, her sudden trust. It kept him awake through the long night. Outside, the wind howled through the canyon, dust settling at last. Inside, a woman finally found her rest, while the man beside her kept watch, listening to every breath as though it were a silent promise. On her first morning in the cabin, Clara woke to the mingled scents of wood smoke and fresh brewed coffee. The room no longer felt as foreign as it had the night before, when darkness cloaked everything and her heart pounded with fear. Now, pale light streamed through the cracks in the shutters, revealing motes of dust drifting slowly, as though they too were learning how to begin a new day. She heard footsteps on the porch, then the steady rhythm of water being pumped from the well. Wyatt had risen long before, as if he had never slept at all. Clara sat up, shoulders still sore from the long road, her dress disheveled, hair tangled. The hearth still glowed faintly, holding the warmth of the night. For a fleeting moment, she felt she had crossed into another world, a world of labor, of measured rhythms, far removed from the days when she had lived bound by fear. When Wyatt came in, carrying 2 tin cups still steaming, Clara rose awkwardly. He set one on the table, his voice low and steady. "Drink while it's warm." Clara nodded her thanks. The cup burned against her hands, the bitter coffee sliding down her raw throat, making her cough softly, yet easing her heart. That first day, Clara sat watching as Wyatt moved about the barn. His work was fluent, practiced, hauling hay, checking harness, scattering grain for the hens. She sat on the porch steps, half in awe, half overwhelmed. These tasks were strange, yet something in her stirred, a wish to try, to prove she was not just a runaway in need of shelter. Toward evening, as Wyatt stacked wood, Clara's voice broke out, trembling. "Could you show me how to help?" He glanced at her, those dark eyes betraying little. Then he handed her a wooden bucket. Draw water from the well. Pour it in that trough. Same each day. Her hand shook as she gripped the rope. The coarse hemp scraped her skin. The weight of water dragged her balance. She nearly stumbled, but Wyatt steadied the bucket before it tipped. He spoke no rebuke, only adjusted her stance, then stepped back. That quiet gesture made Clara feel both safe and responsible. In the days that followed, she learned small tasks, scattering feed, sweeping the coop, stitching torn grain sacks. Her long skirts hindered her, so Wyatt gave her an old pair of trousers and a loose shirt. At first Clara blushed to wear them, but soon she felt the freedom of arms unbound, of steps unhindered. The labor wore her body, yet eased her mind. She began to notice the prairie's quiet voices, the wind sweeping over grass, the hens clucking, the horses calling across distance. These sounds were like the steady heartbeat of a real home. Wyatt remained a man of few words. His directions were short, leaving her to learn by doing. But Clara saw his care in small, unspoken ways. Each morning a cup of coffee set ready on the table. Each meal begun only once she sat down. Her torn blouse mended neatly, though she had left it on the chair. At night, their fatsung, silent ritual continued. Wyatt would lie first, warming the bedding, then sit up when she approached, his voice even. "Do you feel at ease?" At first the question unsettled her, but as nights passed, she found herself smiling faintly in reply. She knew he sought no answer, but to remind her she was not a burden. In the dark, they lay parallel, a respectful space between them, yet close enough that warmth bridged the gap. Sometimes Clara would glance over to find Wyatt's eyes open, fixed on the rafters, as if sleep eluded him. She never asked, only closed her own eyes and rested her head nearer to his shoulder. The awkwardness slowly lifted, not by words, but through small exchanges, her hand offering him a cloth when he returned drenched with sweat, his hand adding wood when he saw her shiver near the fire. Light gestures, repeated until they shaped a rhythm shared. Clara did not yet dare to call this place home, but she felt something she had not known in years: safety. And each night, when Wyatt lay first to warm the bed before she joined, she understood. She no longer faced the darkness alone. In the days that followed, Clara grew accustomed to life on the ranch. She carried water without stumbling, sorted seed with practiced care, and swept the henhouse without sending the birds into a panic. Yet the more she settled into the rhythm of work, the more her eyes caught upon the small details inside the cabin. One stood out above all: the attic door. It waited at the top of a narrow stair, always locked tight. Dust lay heavy on the steps, proof that no feet had climbed there in years. Each time Clara passed, she noticed a thin glow of light leaking through the cracks, as though the past itself lingered above, waiting for someone to open it. At first, she turned her gaze aside, but day by day, her quiet curiosity swelled. Wyatt never spoke of the attic. He passed the stairs as if walking past a shadow, never pausing, never glancing. His deliberate avoidance only sharpened Clara's sense that something important lay behind that door. One afternoon, she was carrying a heavy pail of water toward the hearth. Her damp foot slipped on the stair, and she tumbled, water spilling across the floor. A sharp pain cut through her knee, and she let out a gasp. At once Wyatt came in from outside, steadying her shoulders. "You hurt?" His voice was rough, urgent. Clara shook her head, breath uneven. Her eyes, without meaning to, fixed on the attic door looming just above. The iron latch caught the fading light, silent but watchful, like an eye staring straight back. She said nothing, but her silence was enough. Wyatt followed her gaze. His shoulders stiffened, then eased with a slow breath. Without a word, he set the bucket upright, then reached into the drawer near the hearth. From it he drew a small key. Moving with quiet finality, he turned the lock. Dust billowed as the door creaked open. "If you want to know, see for yourself," he said, low and even, without reproach. Clara rose carefully and stepped inside. Dim light streamed through a small window, falling across shapes shrouded in cloth. In the corner sat an old chair, draped with a worn blue dress, hem frayed with age. On the wooden desk lay several letters, their envelopes yellowed, edges brittle, never sent. The scent of aged fabric and paper filled the still air, making Clara pause. She turned toward Wyatt. He stood in the doorway, tall frame shadowing the entrance, his eyes not on her but somewhere far beyond, as if the small window framed another life. "My wife's," he said slowly. "7 years now. I haven't touched a thing." Clara did not ask further. She needed no more words. The relics spoke for themselves. Grief that had never been cleared away. A past he had kept intact, though it pained him. She moved closer, brushed dust from the desk, yet opened none of the letters. She lifted the cloth from the chair, wiped it clean with her sleeve, then covered it again. A small act, but enough to say she understood, and she would respect it. Wyatt's gaze softened. He said nothing more. Together they descended, the attic door closing behind them. The soft click of the lock was like a period ending a conversation never spoken aloud. That night, as Clara sat by the fire, her mind returned to the attic. She understood then, some losses were not meant to be erased, nor needed to be. They only needed a place to remain, and someone patient enough not to disturb them until the time was right. Later, Wyatt followed his usual ritual, lying down first to warm the bed. When he yielded her the quilt, his eyes held a trace of awkwardness, but also a calm acceptance. Clara lay beside the steady crackle of the hearth, and knew the distance between them had lessened. Not because a secret had been unveiled, but because she had chosen silence, just as he had chosen not to press her for the story of her fear. The night was still dark, but for the first time, Clara did not fear the dark at all. News reached the ranch on a blustery afternoon. Wyatt returned from town with a darker face than usual, his words fewer. He stripped the saddle, set aside the reins, yet said nothing at first. Clara sensed it at once, her heartbeat quickening. When he dropped the canvas bag onto the table, his eyes met hers, short and certain. There was a stranger in town, asking about a girl from Oklahoma. The words chilled Clara's spine. In a flash, the burning wagon and Ralston's body collapsing into smoke surged back like a nightmare. Her hands clenched, nails digging until they left red marks. The fragile calm she had known shattered, exposing the fear that had never left. Do you think it's him?" she whispered, throat dry. Wyatt did not answer at once. He stepped closer, placed his rough hand on her shoulder, steady but gentle. "Don't leap to it yet, but we need to be ready." That evening, Clara could hardly eat. The wind moaned through the shutters, the fire snapped in the hearth, but each sound only unsettled her more. At night, the flames cast their gold across the cabin walls. Clara lay turned to the side, eyes wide, her mind swarming with silent screams. The talk of a stranger had pulled every old terror into the room, crowding her chest. She bit her lip to stifle the sob, yet tears slid down unchecked. Wyatt shifted, wrapping his arm firmly around her. At first he spoke no word, only held her close, steadying her with silence. Then his voice came low and rough, each syllable like iron. "No one will touch you, not while I'm here." The shell Clara had clung to broke. Tears spilled freely as she buried her face against his chest, trembling like a child. All the loneliness, all the dread, long bottled inside, poured out at once. Wyatt only held tighter, his broad hand stroking her back in slow, patient rhythm. In that moment, Clara knew her deepest hunger was simple: to feel safe, to belong. She raised her tear-stained eyes to his. Between them, no words were needed. Silence carried what could not be spoken. Wyatt bent and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was hesitant, awkward at first, yet weighted with years of emptiness. Clara answered, trembling yet fervent, pouring pain and hope alike into it. Firelight painted their joined shadows on the wall, merging into one, no line between. They found each other not in haste, but in need, of closeness, of being known. Clara leaned into him, steady heartbeat beneath coarse cloth soothing her own. Fear ebbed away, replaced by quiet peace. In Wyatt's arms, she felt shielded, sure that no nightmare would come tonight. Sleep overtook her at last, deep and unbroken. For the first time since her flight began, her breath fell even, her rest secure. Outside, the wind howled through the canyon, but within the cabin all was warmth and stillness. Wyatt stayed wakeful, eyes open in the dark, not from worry, but from wonder and awe. This small, fragile woman had given him her trust, a trust he had never dared to hope for. He studied her face as she slept, lashes trembling, tear tracks faint on her cheeks. A tenderness welled up, rousing the heart he had laid to rest for 7 long years. Through the night, he did not loosen his hold. In the quiet, he vowed to himself, whatever ghosts might return, he would not let them steal the peace she had finally found. The rumors in town did not take long to find proof. One morning, as Clara scattered grain for the hens, the sound of hooves drifted from afar. Wyatt stepped onto the porch, eyes narrowing. On the dusty road from the north, 2 riders emerged. The one in front sat tall, his face gaunt, yet his eyes sharp with cunning. The second was younger, his features bearing a faint likeness to Clara, a resemblance that tightened her chest. Wyatt's voice was low. "Steel yourself. They've come for you." Clara froze. When the riders halted at the gate, the man in front spoke. "I am Abel, distant cousin to this girl. The family sent me to bring her back to Oklahoma. She deserted her home, disgraced the bloodline." Clara felt her blood turn cold. She had seen this man once, years ago. The name alone was enough to stir a faded memory. She opened her mouth to protest, but a voice from behind cut across, hoarse and all too familiar. "She is my wife. We have papers." Ralston. He sat his horse, skin pale from wounds not yet healed, but eyes burning with feral force. Clara staggered back, hand tightening on the paper hidden in her dress. He had not died. The fire had only scarred him, not claimed him. And now he masked his intent with this so-called cousin, scheming to drag her back, to seize the land left by her parents. Wyatt stepped forward, broad shoulders blocking her. She isn't going anywhere. If you want to try, then try. His tone was firm as packed earth. Abel smirked. You've no right to keep her. The marriage license was signed. She belongs to Ralston. Clara trembled, but this time she did not stay silent. She drew out the crumpled paper, edges burned, seal smudged. This is what he used to bind me. A forgery. Abel scoffed. Who would believe you? A runaway woman's word means nothing. Wyatt glanced at Clara, then nodded once. We'll take it to the sheriff. Let the law decide. The small procession rode into town. Folks turned to watch, whispering as Clara walked beside Wyatt. Her face set, though fear still clung to her eyes. In the sheriff's office, sunlight slanted through dust-flecked glass, casting sharp lines across the tense faces gathered. Clara laid the marriage paper on the desk. Please, look. It is false. The sheriff, a stern middle-aged man, frowned as he studied it. Hard to tell. We'll need the Reverend. He keeps the true records. The Reverend arrived, lifted the sheet, traced the writing and the seal. With only a glance, he shook his head. No record of such a union in my books. And that seal, no, it is not from my church. Silence fell. Abel's eyes shifted. Ralston ground his teeth, his face twisting from both anger and pain at his injured shoulder. Clara drew a deep breath, a weight lifting from her chest. At last, someone beyond herself confirmed the truth she had carried. The sheriff rapped his knuckles on the desk. Forgery. No standing in this town. If anyone presses this again, I'll see them jailed for fraud. Ralston let out a broken laugh, low and rasping. You think this ends it? I'll return. Nothing that is mine will be taken. Wyatt stepped forward, his dark eyes smoldering. She isn't property. Next time you won't walk away. Ralston's face contorted. Clutching his shoulder, he signaled Abel. The two turned their horses, riding out beneath the half-curious, half-contemptuous stares of the townsfolk. Clara stood still, hands trembling, yet her gaze brighter than ever. For the first time, the law had stood with her, not only because of Wyatt, but because of the truth she had guarded. The false paper, once her chain, now her release. Stepping out of the sheriff's office, she lifted her face to the pale sky, her breath lighter. Wyatt walked beside her, not touching, yet his presence alone gave her strength. You believed me, even when no one else would, she whispered. His reply was steady, sure. I believed the way you clung to that paper, as though it were life itself. Only the innocent hold to truth that way. Clara's lips curved into a rare smile, the first since she had come to this house. For the first time, the road ahead did not feel like endless flight, but a path to stand upon. The shadow of the past still lingered. Ralston had sworn to return, but now Clara knew one thing for certain. She would not face it alone. Spring slipped by quietly, until the first warm days of planting came at last. For Clara, it was the first time in years that morning held a clear purpose. Each day she rose, knowing what she must do and why. Behind the cabin, Wyatt had plowed the rows at the end of winter. The ground was hard from wind, but turned soil showed soft brown beneath, rich with the smell of earth. Wyatt showed her how to cradle seed in her palm, scatter it evenly, then cover it with a light layer of soil. He planted the first row, then handed her the sack. Clara crouched, skirt brushing dirt, hair falling loose, dusting her cheeks. At first her hands trembled, The seeds fell uneven, but Wyatt corrected nothing. He stood nearby, his eyes steady, patient. "Keep your own rhythm," he said softly. Day by day, Clara grew accustomed to tending the hens. At first she flinched when their beaks darted at her hands, but soon she learned to scatter corn calmly, to move slow so they would not startle. One morning, a hen leapt onto the edge of her basket. Clara laughed out loud, a sound that made Wyatt pause from mending fence, watching her for a long while. There were afternoons of fence work, Wyatt driving posts deep into the ground while Clara held the rails, passing him the hammer. Once she fumbled, dropping it into the mud. Their eyes met, then both broke into laughter. Short bursts of humor that chipped away the distance set on their first meeting. So the days strung together, and Clara began to feel her place here was no longer borrowed. Every trace of her hand, the sprouting rows, the clean coop, the sturdy fence, proved she was building this homestead too. Wyatt still spoke little, but Clara learned to read him in quiet gestures. Each morning he set a cup of coffee on the table before calling her to rise. When she strained too hard with the bucket, he would step near, ready to steady without touching unless she faltered. One windy afternoon, her headscarf blew off. Wyatt retrieved it, brushed the dust, placed it back into her hand without a word. It was in such silence that Clara felt most secure. At night they shared the same bed, as had become their custom. Wyatt lay down first, warming the quilt, then yielded space to her. What began in shyness became a ritual of comfort. Now, when Clara lay beside him, she did not hesitate to drift closer, seeking warmth at his shoulder. Sometimes they said nothing, listening only to the crack of the fire, yet in the hush affection deepened, woven into each small act. One evening after a long day at the fence, Clara sat on the porch, hands sticky with resin, shoulders aching. Wyatt brought 2 cups, cool water for her, strong whiskey for himself. She sipped, watching the horses graze the field in fading light. Quietly, she said, "Here, I don't feel like I'm running anymore." Wyatt turned, eyes steady, a faint tug at the corner of his mouth, near to a smile. "Because now you're building." Clara held his words within her, letting them root. Yes, at last she was not only fleeing, but planting, shaping. That night, resting against him, she listened to the slow rise of his breath, the steady beat beneath his chest. She knew then that love was not forged in grand promises, but in shared labors, mending a fence, sowing seed, dividing a cup of water. Quiet work, repeated, strong as the soil beneath them. The fields began to green with the first shoots of spring, and in Clara's heart, another seed had taken root. The tender growth of belonging, of a love not swift but steady, meant to endure. That afternoon, the air was still, only the faint murmur of insects in the garden. After a plain midday meal, Wyatt set off to check the northern fence weakened by winter storms, while Clara remained, deciding to clear the small attic at the back of the house, a space long left to store forgotten things. Climbing the narrow wooden stairs, she drew in a breath, catching the mingled scent of dust and damp timber. The attic was cramped, the ceiling low, light slipping through a small window to settle over crates, broken chairs, and rusted trunks. Cobwebs clung to the corners, and the silence was so deep, Clara could hear her own heartbeat. She dragged a wooden chest from the shadows, expecting nothing more than spare blankets or old tools. But when the lid gave way, it revealed a bundle of letters bound with frayed twine. Dust rose in a cloud as she coughed. Her hand brushed the brittle paper, and an uneasy stirring ran through her. Curiosity overtook her. She unfastened the cord. The pages were thin, the handwriting rounded and steady. The first line froze her breath. "To my dearest Wyatt." Her chest tightened. These were not words from a stranger. They belonged to Wyatt's wife, long gone these 7 years. Worse still, every letter lay unsent. Clara sank to the floor, hands trembling as she opened one after another. Some held only small notes of daily life, reminders to fetch wood, a comment on the kitchen. Others stretched longer, speaking of dread at the coming winter, or loneliness when he was away too long. All of them stopped in the same year, the year Wyatt had once spoken of. She dared not read further. Her vision blurred with tears at the simple, steadfast affection pressed into each line. For a moment she felt herself an intruder, a shadow come too late into a love carved deeply into Wyatt's life. The letters seemed to breathe with the voice of a woman Clara could never replace. Her heart ached. The thought of being compared, of standing beneath a shadow too heavy, constricted her chest. She gathered the letters in haste, meaning to set them back, yet her hands shook too hard to release them. Then came the sound of boots on the stair. Wyatt. He halted at the threshold, his eyes falling on her crouched with the letters in hand. His gaze darkened, not in anger, but with a heaviness unspoken. He was silent a long while before stepping forward, shoulders burdened. 7 years, his voice rasped low. I never once dared touch them. Clara lifted her face, tears marking the yellowed pages. I kept them, he went on, eyes fixed somewhere far. Not to cling, but because I lacked the strength to lay them down. Her grip tightened on a letter. Her voice broke. I don't want to live in another woman's shadow. I cannot. Wyatt lowered beside her, his rough hand closing on her shoulder, firm but gentle. You are no shadow. The one who's gone is at rest. You are here. But I know, yes, it is time to let them rest, too. He gathered the bundle, bound it tight once more. Together they carried it down to the hearth. Wyatt stoked the flames high. Clara stood silent as each page caught, curled, and burned to ash. Firelight flared against Wyatt's face, his eyes steady, though tinged with sorrow. This is not erasure, he murmured. It is farewell. Clara nodded, a knot loosening inside her chest. That night, Wyatt led her to the old oak behind the house. Moonlight fell through its vast branches, wind whispering through the leaves. He carried a small wooden box. Clara placed within it a silver ring once belonging to her mother. Wyatt added a button from his brother's uniform, lost in the war. This will be our wedding rite, he said, voice steady yet softened with rare gentleness. Clara laid her hand over his. No white dress, no witness needed. Only you and this place. They dug a shallow hollow beneath the oak, laid the box inside and covered it with earth. As the soil pressed down, Clara's heart stilled, as though a chapter had closed, leaving room for another. Wyatt stood tall, taking her hand, pressing it to his chest. From this day, you have a place here, not only in this house, but in me. Clara lifted her eyes. Moonlight bathed his face, the night air cool upon her skin. A quiet smile rose to her lips, and within her she heard the whisper, I have been chosen, and I too have chosen. That night beneath the oak, with no music, no flowers, only two souls hand in hand, Clara knew she had at last found her true wedding. For a full week, the north wind beat against the cabin walls, the blizzard burying the doors and paths until the ranch stood like a lonely island in a sea of white. The gale screamed through every crack, a long, mournful howl that made the nights colder still. Clara stood at the window, her breath clouding the glass as she watched the snow heap higher each day. Yet for the first time in her life she did not see the storm as a threat. For by the fire's glow, in Wyatt's arms each night, she knew she had found a home. In those days of isolation, they kept to a steady rhythm. Wyatt spent the mornings splitting more wood, clearing drifts from the stable roof. Clara managed the food stores, tended the kitchen fire, and cooked plain meals. At times they sat together under lamplight, Clara stitching clothes while Wyatt mended tack. In the long silences she felt the bond between them grow. No fine words needed, only a glance or a quiet gesture to say they stood side by side against the winter. One afternoon, while Wyatt worked outside, Clara caught a faint cry beyond the walls. At first it seemed like the wail of a stray cat, lost in the gale. But the sound returned, thin, desperate, like a plea. She hesitated only a moment, then pulled on her cloak, opened the door, and stepped into the whirling snow. The wind struck her face like knives, freezing each breath, but Clara pressed forward. Amid the blur of white, a small figure appeared. A girl wrapped in little more than rags, crouched beneath a low tree. Her cheeks burned crimson from frost, lips blue with cold. She looked up only briefly before collapsing. "My God," Clara whispered, dropping to her knees, gathering the child into her arms. The body was stiff, the breath ragged. Clara lifted her, so light it frightened her, and stumbled back toward the glow of the cabin. Wyatt saw her from the barn and rushed to meet her. He flung open the door, stoked the fire high, and spread blankets on the bed. Clara laid the girl down, her hands trembling as she stripped away the wet clothes and rubbed the frozen fingers. Her mother's lessons rang in her ears: ginger tea, warming oils, steady breath. Wyatt followed her lead, silent but sure. He set a pot on the stove, handed her a dry cloth, and stood close by, his watchful eyes steady on every motion she made. All that night, Clara did not leave the child's side. She spooned warm water into her lips, wiped sweat as fever raged, kept her hand upon the frail chest to feel the heartbeat. Wyatt sat nearby, feeding the fire, and at times resting his hand on Clara's shoulder, a silent reminder she was not alone. The moment carried her back to her own childhood, to nights when she had shivered in her mother's arms through sickness. Now she was the one to pass that shelter onward, to a stranger who already felt like kin. By morning the child's breathing had steadied, color rising faintly in her cheeks. Clara sighed, pulling her close against her heart. The thought came clear. This house had not only preserved her own life, but now sheltered another against the storm outside. 2 days later, when the wind eased, there came a knock at the door. A woman in her 30s stood there, her cloak heavy with snow, her face drawn with worry. At the sight of her daughter safe beneath thick blankets, she collapsed in tears, clutching Clara's hands. You saved my child," she choked, voice breaking. "She was lost when I went to fetch coal. I thought I'd never see her again." Clara helped her rise, speaking gently. "Your girl is strong. She only needs rest." The woman was Martha, a widow living near town. When the girl woke and clung to her, Martha could only weep. Before leaving, she grasped Clara's hands firmly, eyes shining through tears. "This debt I will not forget. If ever you need me, only call." Clara stood still after the door closed, her palms warm from the grip. She had not expected, in the midst of a storm, to plant the seed of friendship, quiet but certain, a bond that might prove a lifeline someday. The blizzard raged on for days yet. In the kitchen, while the kettle steamed, Clara said softly to Wyatt, "Do you see? The snow may lock us in, but it also brought us a friend." Wyatt gave no long reply, only a nod. Yet beneath the table his hand found hers, firm and warm. That night, as Clara leaned against his shoulder, listening to the wind claw at the shutters, a thought came to her. This house was no longer a mere refuge. It had become a place where life itself could endure. Her own, this child's, perhaps more to come. And in the town beyond, there was now a woman who owed her much, ready to stand beside her when the past came knocking again. That morning the Texas sky spread a blue cloth to the horizon. Clara rode behind Wyatt, arms tight around his heavy coat, her tied hair still blown loose by the wind. They left the ranch at first light, following the red dirt road toward the county seat. Neither spoke much, but the steady hoofbeats and the warmth through the saddle were enough to steady Clara's heart. The Blanco County Courthouse stood plain at the far end of the main street. A two-story brick building, dark wood doors, a flag snapping in the early gusts. Wyatt tied the horse and offered his hand to help Clara down. For a breath, their eyes met. She saw his familiar calm, and behind it, a quiet expectancy. Inside, a small room held a long wooden table and a single chair for the county clerk. He was thin, bespectacled, his voice dry as winter leaves. Wyatt signed first, each stroke firm. Clara followed, her hand trembling slightly, yet her letters clearer than they had ever been. When the clerk set the red seal upon the page, Clara drew a deep breath, as if a heavy door in her chest had swung shut. "Congratulations," the clerk said simply, handing over the license. No music, no white dress, only a thin sheet of paper, yet to Clara it weighed like the sky itself. She took it, fingers unsteady, eyes bright. When they stepped back into the wind, Clara's skirt lifted in a rush. Wyatt moved close, a broad hand resting at her back, small, sure. They said nothing, mounted, and turned home. By late afternoon, the sun leaned west, gilding the valley. Wyatt carried a shovel. Clara held a small wooden box, their keepsakes inside. Clara's mother's old silver ring, and a sliver cut from the bridge Wyatt and his brother had built years ago. They chose the old oak behind the house, witness once to their unspoken promise. Wyatt dug, each shovel thrust sure in the still air. Clara knelt and set the box into the earth, her fingers passing once over the lid. Together they drew the soil back and pressed it firm, as if to say that from this day on, what had weighed them down would rest beneath this tree. "Not to forget," Clara said softly, watching the leaves tremble high above, "but to remind us we have passed through." Wyatt squeezed her hand. He said nothing, but in his eyes she read 1,000 words unsaid. After the small rite, they planted 2 young trees by the oak, an apple and a plum. The ground still held last night's rain. Their hands were quick to mud, and neither cared. When the saplings stood straight, Wyatt took his pocket knife and cut their names into the stake. Clara and Wyatt. Dusk lowered a red wash over the fresh-turned soil. Clara gazed at the two small trees and felt a peace she had never known. These would live, weather winter, blossom and bear. Proof that from ash, life can rise again. Wyatt's arm slipped around her shoulders, drawing her in. From now on, this land is ours, he said, low and steady. Clara leaned into the even beat beneath his coat and knew that after all the running, she had found her stopping place. A simple vow. No church, no crowd. Only earth, trees, and two hearts brave enough to choose each other. When the sun slid behind the ridgeline, the ranch settled into that rare purple of day's last light. At the trough, they washed the soil from their hands, dirt and water running thin. They did not hurry inside. Instead, they sat on the front steps and watched the staked saplings stand to the evening wind. "They look so small," Clara whispered, a thread of worry in it. "Small," Wyatt said, arms folded, eyes level, "but rooting deeper than we think, like you." She turned to him, the strong planes of his face lit by the fading light, and warmth rose in her chest. His plain words reached the place in her that had once felt lost, now likened to a living shoot. Inside, Wyatt built up the fire while Clara set to a pot of salted meat, a simple stew. They ate in quiet. In the lamp's gold, their eyes met at times and dropped again, as if the silence itself were enough. After supper, Wyatt brought out an old chair, one leg long loosened. He set hammer and a handful of nails and worked slowly. Clara sat with the new tablecloth, stitching each line neat and firm. The sight, the man mending a chair, the woman sewing cloth, was so simple it caught at her throat. It was the life she had longed for, small work done for a home that was truly hers. Night fell, and a spring rain came sudden, tapping at shingles and panes. Wyatt opened the door and called her to the porch. They stood close, watching the fields blur under falling silver, the soil's scent rising warm. Clara rested on his shoulder and smiled. "This day, I'll keep it forever." Wyatt did not answer. He only drew her nearer and let the rain wash the past thin. By morning the sky was clear, drops clinging bright to the leaves. Clara carried a bucket to water the saplings, careful as if tending treasure. Wyatt watched from the porch post, silent, a quiet pride in his eyes. When she turned back, he stepped down, plucked a dead twig caught in her hem, and let it fall as nothing. The smallness of the gesture startled her heart. She understood then that from this day on their common hours, plain meals, a sapling watered, a twig freed from her dress, were their truest vows. No grand rite, no witness needed. Clara glanced toward the old oak where the wooden box lay, beside the new planted trees. For a moment the years ahead came clear. This spring they are only shoots. Next year they will leaf, and one day they will bloom and fruit while their children grow beneath them. She smiled and took Wyatt's hand. "This land will have a new story." He closed his fingers around hers, gaze deep, "And we'll stay to write it, one day at a time." In that moment, Clara knew the wandering was over. The flight of years past had turned into a steady step upon new ground, where she was chosen, held, and called a wife. Spring crept gently into the valley. Snow melted into thin rivulets along the slopes, and fresh grass pushed up through damp earth. Clara stepped onto the porch, one hand resting on her belly, feeling the small life stirring within. All the days of fear and flight had narrowed now into one steady rhythm beating inside her. The day Alora was born, spring winds drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of damp soil and wildflowers. Clara was exhausted, yet her face glowed as she cradled the tiny girl. The baby's dark hair was damp with sweat. Her fists clenched the air, and in that moment, Clara knew she had traveled the long road only to arrive at what mattered most. Wyatt stood close, silent, his eyes glistening. He laid a rough hand on Clara's shoulder, looking down at the child. "She has your eyes," Clara whispered, voice trembling with weariness. Wyatt's smile was rare, gentle. And her mother's hands. They named her Alora, Light. To Clara, it was more than a name. It was a promise. Their daughter would grow in light, not in the shadows that had haunted her mother. In the days that followed, Wyatt sat at the wooden table, knife in hand, carving a cradle. He spoke little, but shaped each curve with care. The arching sides, the patterns of leaves along the rails. At the headboard, he carved a single star. "So our girl will always have her own sky," he explained. Clara watched, her heart swelling with quiet gratitude. The man who once shut himself behind the walls of grief was now pouring his hands and heart into the present. While Wyatt worked, Clara planted a cherry sapling in the yard, beside the apple and plum trees they had set after their own private wedding. Each stroke of the hoe, each mound of soil, she thought of Alora's future, how the tree would bloom pink in spring, and the child would know she had been born into love and resilience. In the evenings, Clara rocked Alora on the porch, watching Wyatt adjust stakes around the sapling to brace it against the wind. The simple sight filled her throat with emotion. Everything she had once longed for, a place to remain, a hand to hold, a home to claim, stood before her now. One afternoon, Wyatt carried Alora outside, showing her the young trees. "This one belongs to your mother, this one to me, and that," he nodded to the cherry, "is yours." Clara's eyes shone with tears. These were not mere trees, but proof that their family had chosen to stay, to root themselves, to plant legacy. At sunset, when the valley glowed gold, Clara drew the shawl close around Alora and leaned against Wyatt's shoulder. She saw her own journey clear, from a woman fleeing fire and dust to one chosen, one cherished, and now one granted the gift of wife, mother, and keeper of a true hearth. Alora slept in their arms, her breath joining the rhythm of their hearts. The cradle with its carved star waited by the window, and in the yard the saplings swayed in the evening breeze. That picture, a family together, from flight to belonging, from wandering to planting for the future, closed their long road. And in Clara's soul came only one whisper: "I am home." The first weeks with Alora transformed the cabin. Every wall and beam seemed to echo with cries, sighs, and soft coos of new life. Though weary from labor, Clara's heart was full. After years of sleepless nights from fear, she now stayed awake by choice, listening to her daughter's fragile breathing. Wyatt fumbled at first, his hands used to reins and hammer, not the fragile weight of a newborn. Yet when he held Alora, her head nestled to his chest, Clara saw a gentleness in him never revealed before. He would sit long, barely moving, as if afraid any shift might shatter a dream. By day, Clara rocked the carved cradle on the porch. Its creak was steady, soothing, and Alora slept. Clara mended clothes, hung wash, or simply watched the child in the trees beyond. Each branch was proof, once barren land, now a home, their mark for the future. Wyatt still carried the heavy work, but his pace changed. He rose earlier to light the fire, heat water, leave a warm drink at Clara's side. Small gestures, clumsy yet earnest, which Clara cherished deeply. For a man who had long lived shut within himself, these were signs of care spoken louder than words. As spring gave way to summer, the cherry tree sprouted bright leaves. One afternoon, Wyatt called Clara outside to show a crack in a branch. "The wind's bent it," he said. He bound it with soft cord, fixed the stake firm. Clara smiled. "You tend it like you tend our daughter." Wyatt paused, then nodded. "Because both are our future." Martha, the widow who owed Clara her child's life, visited with jars of milk and preserves. At the sight of Elora, she laid her hand gently over the tiny fingers. "This child was born of endurance," she whispered. "One day she will bring light to this land." Clara carried those words in her heart like a blessing. The town's whispers began to soften. Folks saw Clara beside Wyatt in the market, their baby in her arms. They saw the change. The young mother's eyes no longer clouded with fear, but bright and steady. Some nodded in greeting, some offered kind words. Clara knew Elora had become a bridge, the child not only theirs, but proof that new beginnings could take root. One warm evening they sat on the porch, Elora asleep in her cradle. Wyatt carved another star into its rail, while Clara hummed the lullaby her mother once sang. When she paused, she asked softly, "Do you think, when we are gone, she'll remember us through these things?" Wyatt looked at the cradle, at the trees, then laid his hand over hers. "She won't only remember, she will live with them. They will be her blood, her family." Clara's eyes stung, not with sorrow but with peace. The days turned to weeks. Together they tended the herd, the garden, and the child. With each season, Clara saw clearer. Legacy was not distant, but sown daily, in Wyatt's carving, in her planting, in Elora's growth. One bright morning, Clara carried Elora onto the porch. Looking into those clear eyes, she whispered, "You are the answer to all my days of running. Proof that I did not only survive, but found home." Wyatt stepped out, wrapping his arms around them both. They stood together, gazing over the valley gleaming in sunlight. The saplings stirred as though in assent. In that moment, Clara knew the journey was complete. From dust and fire, to being chosen, to planting for the future, and now to peace. From here, the story would continue, in Elora, in the trees, in every day lived upon this land. So the tale of Clara and Wyatt closed not with gunfire or bold vows, but with a quiet cabin, a green garden, and the laughter of a child. She, once a fugitive in the red dust, had found where she belonged. He, once a man locked in memory, had opened himself to life anew. Perhaps it is only in our later years that we truly see the worth of simple things. A hand to hold, a warm meal, a child asleep in a carved cradle. These are the real legacies, the ones that remain in the soil, in the trees, in the memories of those who carry them on. If this story has brought you warmth, or stirred an old memory of your own, I invite you to share it below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, so we can preserve together many more Wild West love stories that linger long after the telling. For in each story, perhaps, we find a trace of ourselves,